Again, my name is Roland Robles, and I'll be today's session leader. We are going through our 6-part series called Idea to Invoice, and what we'll be looking at today is session 6 of this series. Now, if you've missed the first 5 parts of this series, let's kind of recap where we're coming from, and let's talk about what we'll be getting in today. So we've been going through a case study called Acme Audio, and Acme Audio develops audio systems both for marine and automotive applications. Now, what we've looked at is we've looked at all the different tools that MLC has provided Acme Audio to accomplish some very specific needs. We started this many weeks ago looking at SOLIDWORKS Manage and how SOLIDWORKS Manage was able to help Acme Audio get all of their project management needs under control. We then invited over our electrical engineer, Jeremy Browning, to look at how SOLIDWORKS PCB and how SOLIDWORKS Electrical Schematic was helping Acme Audio develop all of their electrical schematics and PCB board layouts. Mr. Travis Jones then joined us in and showed us how DriveWorks is helping Acme Audio do design automation. This is both internal and external to drive their design in those what-if scenarios where we make the same thing but change just a little bit about it to make a new product. I then covered how we can control the ECR, the ECN, and ECO process, essentially our engineering change process, leveraging SOLIDWORKS Manage. And then last time we were together, we looked at Mastercam for SOLIDWORKS, and we looked at how the 3D printing technology was able to help Acme Audio produce their parts more efficiently, and using innovative design tools, they were able to create more creative content. What we'll be looking at today is we'll be looking at how Acme Audio is leveraging a tool to control their business, and specifically the tool is an enterprise resource planning tool, or what most of us know as ERP. Now, before we get into what Acme Audio is doing, let's kind of talk about some common goals. Now, these goals were Acme Audio specific goals, but this is very common across a lot of the customers that we work with. So one of their first major goals was to be able to get true material planning, or what we call MRP, right? They need an MRP engine that sits inside of their ERP tool to actually tell them what they need and when they need it. On top of that, they need to be able to production plan more efficiently and more accurately. Controlling inventory is always a challenge no matter what you're producing, and that is no different for Acme Audio. They need ability to control their supply chain and also control their warehouse for their finished goods that they're actually shipping out and selling. Managing customers and the relationship between your customers is always a challenge. For Acme Audio, bringing in a CRM tool to capture those challenges was very imperative, so that way they could grow their business with their customer base and their clientele. And then last but certainly not least is within ERP, they needed ability to actually have a quality management tool, or what a lot of us know as QMS. All of these little, what I call modules, this really resides inside a true ERP tool. So what was Acme Audio currently doing before they switched gears and brought in a new tool? Well, from a purchasing standpoint and a material standpoint, they issued a lot of blanket POs. So since they didn't have good visibility into what they needed, they knew they had some common parts that they went through a lot, and they would just issue blanket POs for that, right? To make sure that the production lines and the manufacturing team always had raw inventory to keep on producing product. From a planning perspective, just like Acme Audio, I've done this myself, is they did a lot of Excel worksheets, right? And this is how they did the majority of their production planning, was bringing in work orders and work order numbers and job numbers into Excel, and guessing at how long it would take and manipulating the schedule, via all sorts of different equations and logic inside Excel. From a financial standpoint, and as far as, issuing checks to vendors and invoicing the customer, they're leveraging, like a lot of businesses, a financial tool. In this case, they were looking at and using currently QuickBooks. From a customer's perspective, the sales team and the salesperson was managing that customer. So a lot of that data that you would see in a traditional CRM tool was actually, in these little silos amongst each one of the salespersons. And then from their quality perspective, they were leveraging Access databases to try and tie into the Excel production plans and to actually track their quality and return product and work orders that weren't completed to specification. So this was kind of their highlight, their 5 main things that they're doing in their current process. Now, what are the challenges of what they were currently doing? Well, one of the challenges that they're always, trying to get over is excess inventory. And this is both in the raw state, right? Materials that come in that haven't been processed, inventory in the WIP state, and then that finished goods state. They really had no visibility into future production. So anytime they would run a work order on one of their CNC machines or their printers or their injection molding machines, they weren't capturing how long that took. And they weren't doing it in real time. And so that was a huge challenge, because as new work came in and as they finagled their production schedule, they really never knew if they were going to be on time or ahead of schedule, or even worse, behind schedule, until it was too late. As you can probably see, everybody was working in their own little silo of information, so they weren't sharing this data. So when quotes come in and they turn into a work order and turn into a sales order, and then in turn, hit the shop floor, everybody had their own data separately. So there was really no shared data, and it was causing a lot of redundancy and a lot of confusion. And then, to me, one of the most important things from a manufacturing perspective and an MRP's perspective is they didn't have an understanding of what was committed in raw materials. So although they had material in-house to run a work order, they didn't always fully understand, what work order was consuming what raw material until the work order was completed through all phases of manufacturing. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you guys on this web session are probably running into very similar challenges or these exact same issues. So how did Acme Audio solve this, and what did they do to get a better control of their organization? Well, they integrated a true manufacturing ERP solution. And that ERP solution is a solution that MLC provides called DelmiaWorks. Now, when people hear the word DelmiaWorks, they say, oh, I've never heard of that before. But DelmiaWorks has actually been around for quite some time. DelmiaWorks was formerly known as IQMS, which the Dassault organization brought into. Much like a lot of our SolidWorks products like PDM and simulation, this is a mature product that has now been encompassed into the reseller channel, into the SolidWorks cluster. So what makes DelmiaWorks different than a lot of the other ERP tools that are out there? And let me tell you, if you haven't ever looked into ERP tool, there is a million options of ERP tools. Well, DelmiaWorks is specifically designed and it was made for organizations that are in the manufacturing and assembly space. This is for companies that are making product or designing product for manufacturing. Inside the cluster of DelmiaWorks, you're going to see, as we go through the next 20 to 30 minutes, all these different special tools that are encompassed inside of our ERP. For Acme Audio, this started from the time that an RFQ came in, a request for quote, which turned into a sales order, which turned into a work order, which went into the production planning and went into, raw inventory control, and then finally creating the product and then shipping the product. Everything now is happening inside one seamless tool, from ERP all the way to supply chain management. For Acme Audio, this is very key and pivotal in their business, because as they are growing, they are now under ISO standardization, and they needed a way to control the process outside of just engineering, right? So we looked at that a few weeks ago, the engineering change process, but how do we control the process over the whole organization? And DelmiaWorks provided them that tool to do that. Now, when we talk about manufacturing ERP, what does that literally mean? Well, there's a lot of ERP tools out there, as I already stated, and a lot of those tools are meant for different kinds of organizations. For example, if you were a McDonald's or Chick-fil-A, you're going to need an ERP tool, but their needs are much different than, say, General Electric, right? Now, for people that do manufacturing, why are their needs different? Well, they need to be able to see true process control and be able to do true production planning, and they have a lot of very niche requirements that are different than, say, like point of purchase organizations. In Acme Audio's case, they wanted to be able to plug in their ERP tool to their actual automation that was out on the shop floor. They also wanted to leverage a warehouse management system that could help them get control of their finished inventory. And they need to be able to see the actual materials as they're going through the manufacturing process. So that way they can leverage a more lean process like just-in-time manufacturing, so that way they're always getting materials and getting work orders scheduled in the right order to produce the correct product at the correct time. So what are we going to look at for the next 20 minutes? Well, I want to break this down into kind of three discrete things. We're going to talk about customer management, which is going to encompass, creating orders and creating quotes, and how does that work inside DelmiaWorks. We're then going to shift gears over into production planning. How do we do true production planning, where we know, how many parts we're going to need, if we're going to scrap things out, how long it's going to take, and what order to plan our work orders. And then the last thing we're going to look at is we're going to look and talk about inventory control, right? What does that look like for Acme Audio? How are they going to control their inventory as opposed to just counting things and doing audits, every month? So this is how we're going to look at this in the next 20 minutes. Now, demoing an ERP tool is not feasible in a 30 or 40-minute web session. So what I am going to introduce you to the tool so that way you can see what it looks like. But what I really want to focus on is I want to focus in on the concepts and how Acme Audio is leveraging DelmiaWorks to achieve these goals. So now that we know what we're going to be looking at, let's go ahead and fire up DelmiaWorks, and let's go through a few of the interface things that I think would be beneficial. So there's a few ways to access DelmiaWorks, depending on what kind of user you are, whether you're internal or external. We have a web portal versus the normal thick client, very similar to like SOLIDWORKS PDM and SOLIDWORKS Manage. At this case, I'm actually accessing the default system, and so you're going to see a lot of tabs up here. And a lot of people say, well, Roland, that seems kind of confusing. Right now, I'm logged in with the user that has access to all the modules. So you'll see we have our sales distribution module, our estimating module, payroll, PO receiving, accounts receivable, our CRM tool. Just like our SOLIDWORKS products, DelmiaWorks is very configurable. So when a user logs in, we can give them access to the tools they need. In this case, I want to walk through kind of your general interface, and I want to create a brand new quote. So we'll come over here into our sales and distribution module, and I can find any existing quotes by simply just coming in here and typing in, say, a number and choosing one of the appropriate columns, and it'll start an automatic filter and search. So if you're familiar with SOLIDWORKS PDM and SOLIDWORKS Manage and Windows Explorer, it's a very similar searching tool. In this case, I want to go ahead and create a brand new quote. When I hit a new quote, one thing I want to call out is that I'm getting access to all my existing customers, and I can filter these out by name, by company, by accounts receivable code, location, pretty much any piece of metadata that you want. In this example, I'm going to create a new quote for one of our distribution networks, and so I'm going to choose my customer, Abco in this case, and go ahead and hit select yes. Now, we set up a lot of rules to make sure that certain things are happening. So in this case, there's actually some notes that are very specific to this customer. So for this customer, we always need a PPAP, and this customer always wants FedEx and to use their account for any shipping. So this is one of those very little things, but it really is a big thing for Acme Audio, where they can start driving custom setups for their different customers, right? Again, we talked about many weeks ago that Acme Audio creates both OEM solutions where they're bulk shipping and custom one-off solutions. So depending on who they're doing the work for, we really need to be able to control of how this is getting invoiced and quoted and processed and shipped. And so DelmiaWorks provides that one-stop shop for all of the information that anybody in our organization needs for this specific customer. In this case, I'm serializing our quotes. We're going to just call this a test quote. We have our customer name. They're active, so this prevents us from creating a quote for somebody who's not an active customer, or maybe they're on account hold. And then we get all of their important information all in one clean interface. Now, I'm not going to bore you with data entry and metadata, but what I want you to take away from this screen is the fact that in one location, anybody who has access and permission to the screen can get all of the important information. Along with that, for this customer, this is one of our preferred customers, and so we have a blanket discount automatically in there. We have a threshold for, if the markup is a little bit too large, we can set up these rules. And to finish this quote out, it's really simple. We can access our current library, or what we call inventory, of things that we sell. Now, this inventory could be maybe raw inventory, maybe it's replacement parts, maybe we're going to quote them for some labor to do an installation. So depending on what we're doing, we actually have access to all the things that we can technically invoice on. In this case, I'm going to grab something out of our inventory stack, and we're going to go ahead and grab one of these speakers and add it in. When I grab this specific speaker actually has some notes that get accompanied with it. So again, we're giving, in this case, the salesperson all of that standardized information right at their fingertips. This is very similar to the way that we control SOLIDWORKS Part or SOLIDWORKS Drawing inside SOLIDWORKS PDM and SOLIDWORKS Manage. Now, the key benefit for this is once the user is done creating this quote and they save that, when they close this down, this quote is then going to get turned into a sales order. And in turn, from there, that sales order, when we get the appropriate PO or the appropriate credit card, will then turn into a work order. Now, all this happens inside one streamlined system. Now, again, I'm not going to bore you with data entry, but what I want to take away from a customer's perspective is that they're using one interface to quote, which then, depending on our interaction with the customer or the prospect, automatically turns into a sales order. And then from that sales order, we can generate work orders and create our actual material requisition plan. So what do we want to look at next? All right, the next thing that we're going to talk about is production planning. Now, production planning for Acme Audio is probably one of the key things that they were struggling the most with. The first thing is they needed to be able to see their current output. They actually never knew what was going to happen in a day of manufacturing until the day was over. And then they counted up all of the inventory that was created, and then they actually had what their production was for that day. The second thing is what if scenarios. So just like you guys, Acme Audio tried to plan ahead and have a forecast and know what was coming up down the pipeline. But it's hard to account for those, hot work orders, quote unquote, or critical jobs, right? Or things that needed to get done right now. So I call those what if scenarios. So what if, a customer calls us up and they pay extra, to expedite this order and start it today? Well, what does that do for the rest of our production plan? And Acme Audio literally had no way to account for that. The other thing is from a production plan, they had no way to account for non-production or non-productivity activities like machine maintenance, right, or preventative maintenance, or when a machine went down, or even to account for scrap, right? So we're going to run a job that's going to create 1,000 molds. Well, we know in that 1,000 molds, in that standard Bell deviation, that we might scrap a couple parts. So what does that mean? That means that our work order ran, but we only got 998 parts, not 1,000 parts. So how do we allocate for the time to create more parts? So what we're going to look at now, and what we're going to talk about, is we're going to look at how we can do true production planning with DelmiaWorks. So let's get back into DelmiaWorks. This time we're going to navigate over to our manufacturing tab. You're going to see lots of tools in here. And again, for the sake of time, in this format, what I really want to focus on is some of these key concepts. Inside this tool, you're going to see this tool called the scheduling tool. Now, Acme Audio might be a little bit different than a lot of other customers where they actually have a lot of automation built into their manufacturing floor. In this case, I'm breaking this down by manufacturing cell. So we actually have different cells, and we have our shop organized in a certain way. And we'll see that visually here in a second. In this case, I'm going to go into the molding cell. So what this molding cell is showing me is this is actually showing me my current work orders that are queued up for this manufacturing machine, which in this case is an actual injection molding machine. Now, this work order was driven by the quote, which then turned into a sales order, which then got scheduled out from the sales order and divided into multiple work orders to produce parts as needed. From a manufacturing standpoint, these work orders, right, and this production tool is tied directly to the machine. So when the operator starts a job, they clock in, and the machine actually has an interface into our ERP tool. That interface is clocking every time that machine has a successful cycle. That's clocking the inventory and keeping track of the time that that job is running. Now, what happens is from a manufacturing perspective, we're making a lot of the same parts. So my ERP tool is actually learning how long it takes to run a specific job. Now, the next time we queue up a job of that same product, it's going to allocate for both time, scrap, and setup time to run that specific job. So what happens is if our production planner wants to add or insert a new work order, all they have to do is simply hit add and then go grab the appropriate work order. Once that gets queued up into this work order, you're going to see that DelmiaWorks starts color coding our work orders. Now you can see I have some red on here, and that red is telling my production planner that we are not on schedule, meaning these work orders are not going to finish on time. Now, the good thing about that is this gives us the ability to come in here and actually manipulate the schedule. And so to manipulate the schedule is very easy. Or to change this, all we have to do is simply drag and drop. Now, when you drag and drop a work order, DelmiaWorks has the intelligence to actually make sure that you're putting a work order on a specific machine that actually can run that. In this case, it's telling me if I were to change this work order around, that this work order is getting put on a machine that is not in the runs best list. That means that this product is best ran on a different work order or a different machine. So we actually have rules set up in here to prevent our production planner from doing something that might adversely affect our production plan. Now, another way that we can look at this is if we get back into our finite schedule, is we can come in here and look at this by actual machine, or we can see this over all of our shop. So in this case, this is showing all of our injection molds that can take product. And I noticed that, hey, I might have some available time on this machine called 10B. And if I were to move this, you'll see that DelmiaWorks starts color coding my production plan. And so what it's doing is it's anything that is white is an available machine for this type of product. Anything is gray means that that's null and void, that product cannot be put on there. So this helps Acme Audio set up those what-if scenarios to make sure that they are actually getting real-time input as they set up these different work orders. Now, production planning in it of itself is a very complex task. And so how does DelmiaWorks do all this? Well, we're leveraging two things. We're leveraging the fact that all of our users and all of our operators out on the shop floor actually have an interface to log in and log out. And on top of that, with any modern automation, we're actually tying that shop floor back into this ERP tool. So what it's doing is every time that work order runs, that information is getting cached and getting accounted for in our ERP tool. And so this is how the production planner is actually being able to see that information in real time. Now, another way that the production planner is getting more information is they can actually view their shop floor as what we call a plant layout. So this gives them the ability to actually visually see and make sure that all machines are running to their desired output, or if they're down, they can see this from one single interface. In this case, we can see that this Toshiba press is alarming out, and that's because it's currently not running, and it looks like we might need to investigate that further. So from a production plan perspective, DelmiaWorks provides true production planning tools that actually have the intelligence to leak up into that manufacturing environment. Now let's transition over to inventory control, right? And there's three kinds of inventory that Acme Audio needed to control. They needed to control raw materials, they needed to control material that was in process, and finished goods. So how are they doing this? Well, again, we're leveraging DelmiaWorks to keep track of this. Now, the way that this is driven from an MRP engine. Now, I can't show you the MRP engine. There's no way to demonstrate that. But what happens in the software is as work orders get created, in the background, we have a task, right, that nobody actually ever sees run. And that task is evaluating and compensating for the work orders as they come in. It then takes the production plan that the production planner is creating, and it drives the actual need for our purchasing team to go out and purchase product. So what does that mean for Acme Audio? Well, what that means is that once this MRP engine runs, it actually drives the purchase orders and they produce just-in-time raw material needs. So in the background, when the MRP engine kicks off, it's allocating the fact that a work order is currently in process. It's pulling out that work order's material out of inventory, and then it's allocating for new work orders that have been issued. So our requisition team no longer needs to issue a blanket PO. They know the exact time that a work order is going to start on the shop floor, and they know the exact materials. In the background, there is some math that's happening, and we are actually allocating for that shipping time and that time for the raw material to actually hit our shop floor. Now, the next thing is work in process. So what were the needs? Well, as we were looking at this, we're actually taking advantage of what they call an MUI, or machine user interface. So a lot of machines these days have the ability to tie in to other systems. And in this case, DelmiaWorks has a plugin where we can actually tie in into real time into your machines. So what this is doing, right, is all of their stamps and their injection machines and their press brakes and their turrets, they're all tied back into our raw material. So this MUI is actually accounting for when a work order is in process or is finished, it's accounting that inventory as what we call WIP. So if a new work order comes in for finished goods, we know that we already have, say, 100 parts that are halfway finished. So this is giving our shop a better idea of what's actually out on the shop floor. Now, why is that important? Well, I grew up in a manufacturing facility, and I know that when we start talking about work in process and inventory, at the end of each month, we used to have to go out there and actually do an inventory count. What DelmiaWorks was able to help Acme Audio do is eliminate those amount of raw and hard inventory counts. From a financial standpoint, our finance team loves that because they don't want to see any capital sitting on the shop floor in WIP. Now, from a finished good needs, what's going on? Well, obviously I can't show you their warehouse in real time, but DelmiaWorks has the ability to actually set up to things like QR scanners and barcode scanners. So in their warehouse, as these job orders get completed, it's actually each job order is getting barcoded. And for Acme Audio, when that job order gets printed out of DelmiaWorks is actually running a task to print out the serialization barcodes that actually go on each product. So when our warehouse management team is loading up a shipping container or loading up a truck, they're scanning those work orders in real time. And so now at any given point through the day, we know exactly how much inventory is sitting in our warehouse management. So DelmiaWorks is providing a true automated warehouse management system. Again, the key takeaway here is that it's all in a single point of information. So in closing, why did Acme Audio choose DelmiaWorks? Well, it was easy for them to use, and it was one complete system, where a lot of times I see people are having to piecemeal this out. So it was a single ERP manufacturing execution system that streamlined that. It also was a single database, so what we like to call a single version of truth. What this means is that everybody in the organization, whether they're clocking into a work order or creating a quote, or the engineering team, which is setting up a way that we want to manufacture something, everybody's getting into one system. People aren't working in their siloed pieces. From a team member perspective, right? Acme Audio was already working with MLC CAD systems for their engineering and their PLM and their PDM and manufacturing needs. So this provided them a single vendor, right? MLC CAD systems and SolidWorks to deliver all of their software, services, and training and support. So it didn't have to get piecemealed out. Acme Audio, like some of you guys, probably is running very lean from a resource standpoint. So DelmiaWorks provided them for a highly configurable solution without actually having to do a bunch of custom code, which when we're looking at ERP tools and people evaluate an ERP tool to say, can ERP do this or can ERP do that? A lot of times the answer is yes. But also in those same instances, it's because the answer is yes, because you have to actually create custom code. Where all of these modules, all of the things that Acme Audio needed were all in one tool automatically. It was just a matter of configuring them. And then on top of that, Acme Audio didn't want to be a guinea pig. So they wanted an ERP tool that had a proven track record working with manufacturing. And that's really what DelmiaWorks has been doing for, like I said, over 20 years. DelmiaWorks was created on the shop floor for manufacturing people, which was one of the big reasons that Acme Audio transitioned into the DelmiaWorks ERP tool. Now, with that said, that does round up our 6-part series. So again, to recap, we looked at how Acme Audio went from the idea of creating a new audio system to an invoice. We leveraged all of the MLC CAD suite of solutions, which included SolidWorks Manage, SolidWorks Electrical, Schematic, SolidWorks PCB, DriveWorks, 3D printing, Mastercam, and now a fairly new product to our cluster, not a new product to SolidWorks, but a new product to the MLC cluster in DelmiaWorks. With that said, I want to thank you for joining me in this session. I do want to highlight that we have a lot more content coming in for DelmiaWorks for each one of these modules where we're going to be outlining things in more detail.